I live in a cozy 3-unit townhome, nestled among friendly neighbors who have become like family over the years. We share keys, stories, and the occasional drink or meal. One of my closest friends, Sarah, lives in the unit next to me. We've grown so close that we trust each other enough to enter each other's homes when the other is away. It's a small gesture of trust and convenience that has always made our lives a little easier. Sarah and I had an understanding. She'd pop into my place to grab a soda from my fridge, and, in return, she'd whip up some delicious meals for me and share her stash of alcohol for weekend gatherings. It was a fair trade, one that we both appreciated. However, this simple arrangement would soon lead to a bizarre encounter with an entitled neighbor. Someone I will call, well, Ian for short, or let's go with the entitled neighbor. The entitled neighbor lived in a different building, but we all knew her in our little townhome community. She had a reputation for being obnoxious and overbearing, but we were friendly to her, mainly out of the fear of having a volatile neighbor across the street. Little did I know that her antics would soon disrupt the peace of our friendly neighborhood. It all started when she spotted Sarah leaving my house one day. Curiosity clearly got the best of her, and she approached Sarah. Her voice was laced with suspicion. "What's going on here?" Sarah, ever the honest soul, explained our arrangement, thinking it wouldn't be a big deal. "Oh, we're friends, and when my buddy's not home, I grab a soda from their fridge, and they enjoy the meals I cook," she said with a friendly smile. But the entitled neighbor's mind took a different route. She assumed that our friendliness towards her was an invitation to be a part of our inner circle. Without a second thought, she texted me, intending to rat out Sarah. I couldn't help but chuckle at her misunderstanding. "It's fine," I replied, thinking that would be the end of it. A week later, the entitled neighbor made an unexpected visit to my doorstep. She cut right to the chase, asking, "Why won't you give me a key like you did for Sarah?" I had to come up with an excuse, something that would discourage her from trying to enter my home. "Well, you see, it's a safety thing," I began. "I'm the only one with a fire extinguisher, and my landlord won't let me give out more keys." It seemed to shut her up temporarily, and I breathed a sigh of relief. The truth was, I didn't want her inside my house. I could only imagine what havoc she might wreak in there, especially with her penchant for bringing her kids along. My house was filled with expensive computer equipment, and I had no intention of allowing curious children to roam freely. A month passed, and I was gone. When I was unloading a bucket of fireball shots, the entitled neighbor spotted me. She made a beeline across the street, and her eyes locked onto the enticing shot. "Hey there," she exclaimed, trying to strike up a friendly conversation. I rolled my eyes and struggled with the seal on the bucket, eventually managing to hand her a couple of shots. "Thanks, babe, love you," she gushed. I cringed at her words, but I figured it wasn't a big deal. After all, I was just being polite, and we had to maintain a somewhat peaceful coexistence in the neighborhood. Despite my initial resistance, the entitled neighbor continued to message me as if we were close friends. I even found myself looking over at her house from time to time when she was away, ensuring that everything was okay. It was all part of the unspoken code of neighborly courtesy, even if it was challenging with someone like her. Then, one day, I found myself. I received a phone call from my home security system company while I was visiting my mom. The voice on the other end asked, "Do you need the police?" My heart raced as I contemplated the implications of that question. Roommates and keyholders had my security code, and it allowed them 60 seconds to input it, even if it was wrong. Something was undoubtedly amiss. I rushed home with a sense of dread gnawing at me. When I arrived, my front door was wide open. A lamp escorting summer air to infiltrate my once cool abode. All while racking up my electric bill. I couldn't believe my eyes. 2 police officers stood inside my living room. And there was the entitled neighbor standing at my kitchen counter as if she owned the place. With an eerie nonchalance, the entitled neighbor declared, "Here she is. She lets me in her house. We're best friends." My jaw dropped, and I struggled to process the situation. Apparently, the entitled lady had a garage door code to Sarah's house. And during one of her unauthorized visits, she discovered my house keys. Unbelievably, she had the audacity to take my belongings while I was away as if she were entitled to them. Even worse, she didn't bother to send me a message when the alarm started blaring. Nor did she make any effort to leave when the police arrived. The whole ordeal was surreal. I couldn't comprehend why someone would think it was acceptable to invade my personal space, even going as far as to break into 2 houses as though it were a casual endeavor. The police had taken 8 long minutes to respond, leaving me in the dark about what the entitled neighbor might have been doing in my home during that time. I wasted no time in pressing charges against her, determined to hold her accountable for her actions. It wasn't just about my personal belongings, it was about maintaining a sense of security in my own home. To add insult to injury, my city imposed a $100 fine for having an unregistered alarm system. Frustrated, I paid the fee and discreetly left the bill in the entitled neighbor's doorway. A symbolic reminder of the consequences of her entitled behavior. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could someone feel so entitled to another person's property? It was a question that lingered in the back of my mind as I prepared for the impending court case against this entitled neighbor. The day of the court hearing finally arrived, and I sat in the courtroom waiting for the proceedings to begin. The entitled neighbor shuffled in, her demeanor a stark contrast to the confident intruder I had encountered in my home. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the room as she took her seat. The judge called the case, and the proceedings began. The entitled neighbor's attorney attempted to paint her actions as a joke. It was a simple misunderstanding, a misguided attempt at a neighborly camaraderie. But as I recounted the events that had transpired, the judge didn't seem convinced. "You broke into 2 houses?" the judge remarked. "This goes beyond a simple misunderstanding. It's a breach of trust and privacy." Her attorney tried to argue that she had genuinely believed we were close friends, citing my polite demeanor and the occasional gesture of sharing drink or meals, but I pointed out that these actions were simply acts of neighborly courtesy, not an invitation for someone to invade my home in my absence. As the arguments continued, the entitled neighbor's face grew paler, and her confidence waned. It was clear that her sense of entitlement was crumbling in the face of legal scrutiny. The judge ultimately ruled in my favor, and the entitled neighbor was held responsible for her actions. Outside the courtroom, the entitled neighbor approached me with a look of contrition on her face. "I'm sorry," she muttered. Her voice seemed to be filled with actual remorse. "I don't know." I nodded, acknowledging her apology but understanding that the damage had already been done. In the end, the entitled neighbor paid the price for her entitled behavior, both in the eyes of the law and in the relationships she had strained with her neighbors. Our once friendly neighborhood would never be the same. But perhaps it was a necessary lesson in setting and maintaining boundaries. As for Sarah and me, we continued our mutually beneficial arrangement, albeit with a heightened sense of caution.